Awesome, awesome, guys. All right, so episode three, Smart Money Sundays. All right, we're gonna start off with going ahead and reviewing episode two. Seeing some of the things that we were looking for there, right? Truthfully, the analysis on Wyckoff Sundays episode two was again a banger, right? Elite, elite, elite. Like episode one was also great. Episode two, everything pretty much also played out exactly how we predicted at the beginning of the week. So firstly, obviously the first thing that we spoke about, so the main things firstly that we'll talk about that we spoke about was DXY first and foremost, right? We spoke about USD currencies from there. We spoke about gold and silver, right? We spoke about BTC, what we could be seeing, and when we spoke about indices as well. And like I said, each one of those was really on point. So the first thing we spoke about with dollar was the possibility of actually seeing, the market, kind of going against the trend that we've been seeing, which is obviously, potentially looking for buys for that, right? And so, one of the things that we spoke about, was obviously the daily institutional candle that had printed, the week before, right? We spoke about the liquidity that was sitting above, and the also multiple imbalances as well. So like I think here we talk about that. So, we could see here imbalance is sitting up there, imbalance is sitting up there. That price could most likely start to head towards that. Even if we even said like, obviously, we could be bearish, right? And everything like that. And like most people want to see dollar bearish, most people want to see dollar down. That's when I typically like to get cautious, when a lot of people have the same opinion. But at the same time, if things play out the way that I want them to, then, I'll still look for that same idea, right? So obviously, here what we were kind of saying was we could see a short-term buy up. Oh, whoops, let me make this white here so we can see it better. Yeah, so kind of seeing like, all right, can we see a short-term push up, right? Like basically like obviously playing off of that daily institutional candle to get back into those gaps, right? To get back up and above the different points of liquidity as well that we saw. If we go back to the beginning here. Hopefully we can see it a little bit
Firstly,
better.
we have obviously, as always, we're gonna go ahead and start off with dollar. Okay, dollar is the king of the market. Really,
I
a lot
just
of things
want
that
to
happen
go
we can
ahead
attribute to
and
dollar as well. This kind of gives us the higher time
just get
frame, and
to
now
the
are
liquidity.
still flows here.
Oh, there we go.
Time,
There we go.
last week we ended up seeing a huge sell
Right here, right? So we were speaking about how, again, we had the huge sell-off last week, right? We were speaking about the liquidity that was sitting above here that most likely price would drive towards there. We said that if we saw price distribute here, then maybe we can go ahead and look for a sell. But until then, we were going to be pretty much assuming that this has some potential to basically be a spring in the market, for a potential even higher time frame accumulation, which we could still be doing, right? Last week did not really invalidate that idea at all. That maybe, again, like with the way that we broke this very significant higher time frame low, right? With the way how we did so with like I said, like a really nice daily institutional candle here, right? Seeing that happen and then also seeing how price was mostly trading in a range, right, for the majority of the, last year, right? Like this is a long time that we've really been ranging here on dollar, right? Currently from the beginning of the range to the end, right? It's about 300 days or so. So, almost a year that we've been kind of, realistically, everyone's been like dollar down, dollar down, dollar down. But, we haven't really seen that much moves for that, right? Now, that being said, when I do see ranges like this, whether it's higher time frame or lower time frame, I do look at the possibility of the entire thing, again, being a Wyckoff schematic. So I do think that's still possible, right? And so far, we haven't really seen price action to invalidate that. The only thing that would really invalidate, obviously, this really being a full-on accumulation is if we end up getting back up into the previous distribution, right? Which is really just the point of order flow over here, right? So basically here we had a distribution that happened, back in the middle of January, right? This could end up being a zone for us to actually look for shorts if the order flow is going to continue, right? But if again, this entire thing is an accumulation, then the most likely scenario is that we will break out from that order flow and then we can go ahead and look for maybe like an LPSY or whatever it might be to actually give us the next buy up towards like these highs, or maybe just using a first target to this extreme area there. But that's kind of still the mindset that I'm in. So, personally for me, I'm more leaning towards the buy side because of the way that we made the lower low was not very convincing. It doesn't really show me weakness personally, right? The way that we made the low to me looks a lot more like it has some potential to be manipulation because we just see that one daily down candle that goes ahead and sweeps that low, right? We look at the 4 hour as well. 4 hour also has, again, that one down candle that actually finishes taking out the low there as well. And then, from there, we just really start to see, market trending up, right? We took multiple like sell ideas here. I actually haven't even really managed to position in a buy idea. Last week I should have been able to. But here we see, we ended up taking a sell, I think, at some point, like in there. We took a sell here, right? But really for me, the buy zone is going to be below these lows here, right? So for me, where I really like potential buys, as long as we don't like distribute before coming down into there, is going to be this zone in here. Basically, like, this is kind of like our last point of order flow there, right? So kind of having like, again, like this pullback before we really saw the market go ahead and shoot up, right? And then we also see that, above that pullback here, we have points of liquidity. Here we have liquidity from last week as well. So I wouldn't be surprised to see the market go ahead and trade down into this level. And then the question is if down here we can really go ahead and see, all right, are we going to continue to align with that daily candle? Or is it going to be like, a higher time frame, continuation of this trend, right? So it really still remains to yet to be seen, right? When I look at the top here, I don't really see any points of liquidity that we need to go for. Right, we recently went ahead and like filled imbalance here as well, right? This is a pretty key imbalance inside of this down range. So if we were to see sell-offs, this could potentially be the zone for it. But again, I would personally want to see price actually tap back into the order flow. So for me, I'm kind of like, I think we're obviously right now in a zone where, we're much different than last week, right? Last week we were right here, right? And when we were here last week, right, I think for me, it was a lot more clear that we would see the buys to the upside because one, we had the liquidity that was sitting here, and two, we had imbalances that were also sitting right above. So it was a lot more clear for me that we were going to see that push to the upside. But now for me, I feel like we're really in the middle of a very key area, right? We're in the middle of this range between this high and this low. Right. If we get into the extreme areas for here for the buys, I think this could be where we could potentially look for accumulations. Right. And if we end up getting a big manipulation up into this zone, then maybe this could be a zone where if we do see signs of distribution, on that lower time frame, then we can go ahead and target that. Right. So essentially what I'm telling you guys from a higher time frame perspective, looking for sells above 98.5, right, would be kind of what I would want to see. Right. Getting price above this high here. Right. And then, from there, getting back into the distribution, maybe selling off from there. And then for buys, I would look for below 96.6, right? Where we're going to start to go and scale into the lower time frame and see, okay, can we see more schematics here? Can we see the 5 phases happening in here? So that we can go ahead and, again, frame a potential long idea or a potential short idea, depending on what we do end up getting, right? And where the liquidity ends up being, right? If we get down to here and like there's no liquidity, there's no imbalance to the upside, there's no real reason for us to come back up, I might doubt looking for those buys a little bit more in this area, or I might wait for more price action confirmation than normal, right? If I see liquidity building up to the downside or, and then we come up here, then yeah, I'd probably favor that to, maybe at least come for that liquidity kind of thing, right? So context obviously really matters in terms of what price looks like when we get into those zones. Normally in the past Wyckoff, sessions that we've had, we kind of spoke about like the past Wyckoff sessions that we've had, we had a clear direction. We didn't really speak about two zones. Like the first Wyckoff Sundays episode 1, right? We spoke about the probability that we were going to go ahead and get below this low, which did happen. And then once we were here, we spoke about the probability of us going ahead and going up, which did happen. We didn't really look for the opposite side just yet. And I think for here, it can really go either way. We're in the middle of the range. We have an institutional candle there for order flow. We have trap candle up here and a distribution for order flow. So it's going to be, what does price look like when we actually get into one zone or the other? And then, we can make our decision from there. So those are going to be the zones I would like to see happen for dollar. All right, guys. So that's my analysis for dollar. Oh, shoot. Sorry, guys. I'm totally sorry. I was supposed to be going through all of the different types of things that we spoke about last week. So my bad. I just went straight into dollar. And then I even spoke about like the future, right? But anyway, sorry. So here real quick before we, get into, the rest of the things, right? We're going to, again, continue to review what we spoke about for, Wyckoff, Sundays for, currency, right? And so one of the things that we spoke about for currency was the possibility, again, if, for things like EU, if dollar is going to be going ahead and continuing to the upside, right, then we should be able to see sell opportunities for EU. And so, we spoke about, that basically seeing like pullbacks to basically look for potential shorts.
She's seeing constant reaccumulation, daily institutional candle. And again, here we can see,
I think we were looking at this daily candle there, right? So what ended up happening with EU, we didn't really end up getting like the best pullback that we wanted, right? I believe price was right around here when we spoke about it, and what we kind of wanted to see was like just a pull back up to here to then go ahead and short. Instead, we ended up just respecting lower time frame highs and then seeing the market go ahead and trade down towards this new level, right? So yeah, when it comes to or EU, we didn't really get the example there. But what we did end up getting was really, really nice reactions for clean trades on things like NZD USD and AUD USD. So with kind of keeping with that dollar bias, right? If you kind of kept with that, right? I think this was probably the cleanest example for us to go ahead and actually see the shorts, right? We can see here how we had a previous high, right, where we had order flow. We see the market kind of create highs here, sweep it, right, before we then start to trade away. So yeah, for currency, I think last week the best things that we could have used was probably NZD USD and AUD USD, right? To go ahead and take advantage of
UJ,
that, right?
right? But
Now,
all that can really change when we get the order flow,
and I think
right?
that's what we
But
spoke
all
about.
that can, you guys want,
So yeah, now the next thing we spoke
honestly,
about
pretty
was gold and silver. Okay, so we actually ended up, calling out the bottom of the week for gold and for silver. So the market ended up opening, or sorry, when we spoke about it on Wyckoff Sundays was right over here, right? And then, basically what we were saying on Wyckoff Sundays was that most likely that low that we were seeing was not the bottom for multiple reasons, right? We saw how there was a big wick, sitting in that area. We saw how there was a gap sitting below that area as well. So that most likely we would be seeing the market open and actually continue to the downside. And then from there, we were saying the main zone that we were looking for to actually see, that we could potentially get reactions would be just down here. So we marked up this push to the downside on the daily, I believe it was, if we can see exactly where it was on the daily. Yeah, here, but where's the daily? Here we go, the daily, right? So here on the daily, we could see this was the real last pullback that we had before we had that huge rally up to the upside. So we said higher time frame wise, the most likely scenario was going to be this huge down candle that we had there was going to be where gold was going to come into to then go ahead and potentially react, maybe even for a higher time frame move, right? Because I do think reversals are very possible on gold. I think like when we have very fast pushes down the way that we had just like 2 weeks ago, that typically doesn't last, right? What's fast don't last, they say, right? What's slow grows, right? It works the same way in the market. So when we see kind of fast crashes like that, huge like I think silver dropped like a ridiculous amount. Silver was trading like a freaking meme coin, right? So like, chances are that's not going to last, and chances are we will see a recovery up. I think with metals. But yeah, this is basically that same zone that we called out on Wyckoff Sundays, right? Was this daily down move, right? We expected that next, push to the downside to happen. And yeah, price did that, right? We just ended up sweeping this internal liquidity before we ended up going to the upside. We could see we had like this low here before we came up, right? And yeah, it was just really, really, clean type of price action. We can even see here, really, really nice sell-offs into that zone before big buys up. And then this is our mitigation phase right there. So we did end up getting a 5 phases setup. We can see here we also had a gap. And during the week, we spoke about that gap as a potential zone to go ahead and buy up from if we weren't going to respect here, right? But then that didn't happen while we were on the trading session. So we didn't get to call it out for everybody. But, they basically happened during Asian, right? So yeah, still possible that we even like, come back down and, test back into there. I think this could be a good zone to play off of for the future, right? But again, that's a little bit less higher time frame wise. But what I would say higher time frame though, for sure, not necessarily for sure, but what I do think is that this is probably the bottom, right? And I think that now we're starting our order flow to go ahead and continue to the upside, right? Whether we end up seeing a sweep down of all these lows and then we buy back up, that would be like the best thing that we could possibly see. For us to actually get a position that we can really easily hold long term, would be like basically if we could get back down below these lows at 45.90, right? So below 45.90, I would say we can potentially start to position ourselves for a long-term potential move because I really do like the reaction that we had, out of this zone. I really do like that we, decided to sweep the internal liquidity now. And it kind of makes me think that, again, we probably won't see price get lower, right? To do what? To sweep the internal liquidity again, right? Like probably not. Although we do have a gap here, right? It's not necessarily the most important thing to me, right? I do like the price action that happened in that low, like I said. And so I'm starting to think that we might start to see gold, continue to the upside, right? So yeah, if that's the case, then maybe things like dollar will sell off, right? Like we were saying. So we'll see. We'll have to monitor how price, goes in the first couple of days of the week. But just depending on what zone, like, we actually get into, what we break above, right? I wouldn't necessarily say that this is, the high there for dollar, but we'll see. Could be, right? We do have a 1 hour institutional candle there, right? 4 hour institutional candle as well in the same zone. Let's look at the 2 hour here. 2 hour also has an institutional candle. So yeah, there are multiple time frames that are kind of showing there on the bigger time frame. This could be a top, but again, I kind of want to see price get a little bit higher up, just from a higher time frame perspective. All right. So that was gold. Predicted that very, very nicely, right? If you followed that on Wyckoff Sundays, you could have caught the bottom, right? Silver, all right. Silver, I believe. Oh, let's see where we opened here. Yeah, so silver, we were saying the same thing. We were saying we'd probably see price come lower. I think we said we'd probably respect this. We didn't end up doing that. So silver ended up doing one more sweep here. But again, I do think that that's what it is. It's just a sweep, right? Maybe it's possible that silver really wants to do this. I don't know. I would say on the daily time frame, this is our real next zone. These are all kind of just like internal, lows, right? I wouldn't really look at these as too important, right? We do have imbalance sitting below here, right? Let's kind of look at this wick here on multiple time frames, right? So 4 hour here, we also have a wick, right? 2 hour wise, we got a wick at the bottom, but it also has a nice 2 hour candle. 1 hour wise, big candle, good candle, but again, wick. It is possible we drive below here, to be honest, guys. I mean, you know, we don't necessarily have the best higher time frame idea that this could be a bottom, right? Let me go ahead and take a look at the volume here, right? Okay. All right, interesting. Right. But what I am seeing here is that, as we started to get to the bottom, we definitely started to see higher points in volume, right? Which is a really good look. And we really are starting to see price drop in volume, right? As we start to get lower in price action, right? So again, classic signs of accumulation. And again, just kind of supports the idea that this push to the downside is most likely temporary and that right now we're accumulating, right? So the question now is like, all right, is silver going to hold, after sweeping here? Is that the spring? Is this the STM phase B and eventually we're going to end up getting another spring, right? And if we did, end up, going ahead and doing one more, I think this zone here at about $54, Jesus Christ, $54 is insane. So yeah, maybe I don't know, maybe not because $54 feels a little bit too low for me because when like just people like, again, like that would be about 120% gain just getting back up into the highs. So yeah, I mean it could be a long-term opportunity for you, those of you guys that haven't bought silver, right? Maybe that you can position yourself. If that does end up being the low there, right? If we do end up getting one more sweep, and I think there is a possibility of that, just given the fact that, again, like what really took the liquidity there was, a big wick. And like 4 hour wise, again, really big wick, not really great institutional candles. So daily and 4 hour for me, tell me that most likely we will be seeing price sweep below that low. And if we do sweep below that low, I would really pay attention to silver for potential buys. I think the volume is showing it. I think the price action is showing it, right? And so now it's just about seeing like, all right, where is this reaccumulation going to happen, right? If we get down here, y'all, like that's going to be a golden opportunity, right? That's what I think. If we get down to 54, below 55, basically, I think that this is going to be a golden opportunity for the daily time frame to hold until all-time highs, right? Or at least up into this gap up here, right? Which is still at about $100, right? So if you manage to get like a $55 entry, if we get up to 100 again, that's about an 80% gain on that, right? Silver wick a trap candle at that level. We do have daily trap candles sitting here, right? So we do have like, this trap candle there, right? This one here, right? We definitely do see it tap into there. For me, like when I'm really looking at like higher time frame, like reversals though, I would rather see things like this versus trap candles, right? These can easily just be like internal points of liquidity, right? That we do end up taking, right? Before getting to like, again, the real reaccumulation, right? For me, like, I don't know. Trap candles, I personally don't like to play off of unless there's already an institutional zone or a Wyckoff schematic that it's playing off of, right? This is kind of like natural order flow that happens, right? Like on the lower time frame. That's why we see these trap candles like this. Maybe that ends up being what we react from, right? I personally don't like playing off of zones like that with the dailies. I like to play off of zones like this that we kind of saw on gold, right? So, it's possible, maybe gold ends up reacting off a zone like that, but silver just ends up tapping into the trap candles, right? Also a possibility there. Let me see when this happened. So this was December 31st low, right? Gold here, this is also the December 31st low, right? So technically, gold held this low here that happened on December 31st. Silver took it out. So maybe, right? Maybe, I'm just, it's not bad to look for the continuations. The volume has already dropped off really well. So, I don't think it's wrong, right? If this does end up holding, right, then I think this zone could end up being something, right? So really, this is how I would look at it would be like either one, you know, we hold here and we go, or two, we're gonna have one last big shakeout, right? And this will probably be again very, very fast, very, very quick. Um, to push back, to the upside. I don't think it'll be there long. But yeah, I would really look at those two main levels, right? Um, but yeah, it's not bad here. It's not bad. I wouldn't say it's great, but it's not bad, right? 4 hour wise here, we do have a nice down candle, right? The fact that that does align with the daily trap candle is pretty nice there too. So we did trade into a decent enough level. Again, it's just like for me, when I look at, really good zones that I want to see happen, you know, I don't want to see like big wicks at the bottom of that, right? Big wicks for me are liquidity, right? Just like the way that it was when we started off last week, right? Like we saw that, again, silver had a pretty big wick, sitting down here, right? So the most likely scenario was that we were gonna sweep that, right? And so like, the fact that we swept, but we didn't sweep with a candle, we swept with a wick, for me, I don't really like about it, right? That's what I don't like. But if you want to go smaller time frame wise, 1 hour wise, 30-minute wise, 2 hour wise, I think this zone here can make sense. So if we do end up seeing silver kind of take some internal zones, maybe this can be where we end up buying up from, right? So if you like this low, this could be something that you can tap into. If not, then down in here, right? Um, cool, cool, cool. And again, I'm yapping about what I'm seeing in the future when I shouldn't be. We're supposed to be going through this, but whatever, it'll be a mix this time. Now Bitcoin, all right, Bitcoin obviously, we spoke about the probability that we were most likely going to see this low here get taken, right? The week before we called out sells like up in like that like 80,000 85,000 level, right? And now, obviously we did end up seeing that, right? We also spoke about the potential, for buys. A lot of other people, they dropped their charts for the idea, right? So for example, here, right? People were dropping that, most likely we would see price kind of get below there, right? Get down into like the 70,000, 60,000 levels. And that's what price ended up doing, right? We did end up seeing the market go ahead and trade down on Bitcoin and, really aggressively, take out those lows, right? So as we could see here on Bitcoin, right, we can see the market traded all the way down to about 60,000 and change, right? 60,050, right? And then, okay, cool. And then, we end up having basically again like us coming back into this previous point of accumulation that we also spoke about last week, right? So personally, guys, my outlook with Bitcoin is I still have belief in it, right? I do think that, seeing the buys will make, can make sense, especially with the way that this, happened, right? Obviously, like, yes, you can make the argument of like the yearly cycles and stuff like that. But I think that when it comes down to like where we are now in Bitcoin, I also feel like it's in a much different place than how it used to be, right? In the sense of, now there's a lot more institutional adoption, right? We have things like the ETFs, we have things like the Clarity Act, we have things coming out that are now making this into a market that I think is going to start looking a lot more like indices, where the price, like obviously there's still bear markets in indices, right? But the price cycles aren't as pronounced as they typically are, when it comes to crypto, right? Like when it comes to the drops that we see in crypto for bear runs, right? Which is like, again, like 75%, from top to bottom, right? Right now from top to bottom, we're sitting at about a 50%, push to the downside, right? So I don't really think we're too far. And I also think that when we had this push to the downside, we didn't have Bitcoin ETF, we didn't have Ethereum ETF, institutional money did not have the opportunity to get in. And I think that's what I mean is like, I think that the cycles from the bottoms to the tops are going to be shorter in time because demand is going to be more continuous. And I think that, it would also make sense for us to see, sorry, shorter in time because they're more continuous. And I think it would also make sense for us to see less moves down that are as pronounced as they used to be, right? People make the argument that in every single cycle, right, we've seen the market go ahead and trade down like ridiculous amounts, right? Like about 75%, right? So for again here, right, we had in this bear market, like I said, 79%, right? When we talk about this market here, right, what did we have? Like 84%, right? In this bear market over here, I think this was also technically a bear market, but it shouldn't have been. Oh, no, no, yeah, there's this one, 2013. Um, Here, right? 85%, right? And then here, 80%, right? So again, it's like, yeah, around 75, 80%, 85%, right? For a lot of these pushes to the downside. But again, like for me personally, like what I'm thinking is my outlook on this bigger time frame wise is that I think that we can maybe see cycles change, and I don't think that's unrealistic, right? This is the first bear market that we've had where we have ETFs in existence, where we have things like the Clarity Act in existence. And I also think that narrative when it comes to what is it that people are pushing right now, where's the fear, uncertainty, and doubt coming in, right? And I think that every single time that we see like the bottom of a potential move, we get something like that, right? So for example, COVID, for example, FTX crashing, right? And everyone right now is talking about this whole like Jeffrey Epstein thing, right? Where like, oh, Jeffrey Epstein is, the founder of Bitcoin and like blah 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 blah, or like, whatever it is, like, and kind of just talking about, Bitcoin in kind of like that light of like, like which is what the argument was, that it's only used for crime and like all this stuff. And people are like, oh, if it comes out that Epstein was like the founder and like he was like, a big thing, then like crypto will like again go to zero or whatever. Um, but they're forgetting about the use case, right? The use case for Bitcoin, right? Beyond that, right? Obviously, it can be used for that, but it's not only used for that, right? Anyways, really all I'm saying is like I just find it very interesting that that whole narrative comes out and then Bitcoin drops the way that we did, and then Ethereum drops the way that we did, literally right when that comes out. So like I'm like, again, I think that creates like I think that that whole thing created a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. I think that, seeing that and combined with seeing crypto dump the way that it did is going to make people think like, oh no, right? And again, when there's high fear in the market, that's when I personally want to jump in, right? So for me, I ended up going ahead and going ahead and trying to load up on some ETH, right? So I did make an attempt on ETH at about 1860, right? Down here, right? With ETH, I like a lot because again, we're in a super extreme area for ETH, right? This is where the last time I called out ETH was right around here. And again, like we had like a really nice manipulation to the downside. We didn't really have price come back and mitigate yet. And again, like when we look at like even how, we dropped into this zone, firstly, I think this was very simple and easy for the sellers, right? These relatively lower highs, right? And I think that when we see huge drops like this one, like literally over the last 8 days before I bought, we had dropped about 40% in 8 days, right? And so for me, like that was kind of the main reason why when we got back down into this area, I was like, okay, yeah, let's go ahead and look for a position. Because even just getting back up into these highs here that were basically like, if this isn't accumulation, the top of it, right? It's about a 96% gain, right? And like again, if crypto does recover as a whole, and like, kind of the theory that I'm thinking that, maybe the cycles end up being a little bit different this time around, right? Um, than 167% return, right? And even if we do continue to drop, like this is a great place to dollar cost average, right? Because even if we do end up getting down, I mean, let's say somehow we end up getting down to like $400 on ETH, which I think is just ridiculous. But let's just say we do end up getting something like that where this order flow starts to break down since the last bear market, right? If we do end up getting something like that before we, push to the upside, you're still gonna have a great entry, right? Obviously, you're gonna have to hold some drawdown, right? But realistically, this ain't the top, right? This ain't the top of the market forever, right? So when you start to get down to things like this, now this is where the risk to reward starts to look more favorable because now you're buying at prices where even if we do come down, but let's say in 2 years we do end up getting back to the upside, right? Well, guess what? 170% return, right? You know what I mean? Like just getting back to the highs, not even seeing like, all right, well, where can our expansion potentially go to, right? When is ETH going to hit 8K? When is ETH going to hit 10K, right? So like, again, I think it's a good price level to be starting to just look at dollar cost averaging, for long-term investing. And like we'll see in the next couple of weeks, we'll see in the next couple of months, what crypto ends up doing. But personally, guys, like I think that the narrative out there is bear run. And I think that I like to do the opposite of what people say. So that's kind of, what my mindset is with crypto. Maybe, I'm wrong. Maybe we do end up getting down to like, again, I do see the possibility of like 30K if we really want to do an extreme level, right, down into this area. But I also think this reaccumulation was very strong. I think that, I think Bitcoin ETFs launched over here, right? So, I mean, you know, it's it's possible that again we don't even get back down into those levels, right? We make it difficult to position. I don't think many people will buy here, and then eventually we end up getting maybe a fast move. Like realistically, that's what I would want to see. If we're right about this, like price is not going to stay at these levels for very long, right? Same with ETH, right? If we're right about this, price is not going to stay at 2000, for very long. So that's kind of like my mindset with what I'm seeing here with ETH. All right, guys. So that's my idea there with crypto. All right. And what we obviously saw last week. Okay. Indices, last thing. And again, this is where you guys can kind of drop if you guys want me to look at something specific that I haven't looked at, right? This is kind of my last of the pairs I typically look at. All right. So indices, right? One of the things that we were seeing was we basically potentially called out that we could be seeing drops lower on things like NASDAQ, right? We spoke about the fact that the way that we bought up here and sold right back off was a little bit too aggressive and kind of like, again, we had a large amount of liquidity that we went ahead and took at that moment. And so we said that the most likely scenario was that we were going to be breaking through points of order flow, whether that's here, or whatever. And then we were going to go ahead and buy, right? After having seen price do that, because when we saw like, again, that push to the upside there, higher time frame wise, it didn't exactly show us strength with that high, right? So and again, that's what we did end up seeing. We ended up seeing a huge sweep of all lows. I also said on that call that I still think that this is most likely the bottom, like very, very high chance that this is the bottom. I had a lot of conviction in that being the bottom of NASDAQ. And obviously now what we've seen happen is, pretty nicely that, right? We've had this low, right? And then, get taken, right? Again, with a really fast move to the downside, right? This isn't slow, right? Very, very fast move to the downside, going ahead and getting back into extreme levels. And then we end up seeing a big buy up out of this range, right? So really nice price action for what we wanted to see. And again, like I do think that, indices are the play, right? Like I really do think that for long-term moves, indices can be something that we can all position in. I think that right now, like we're seeing some potential for bigger time frame moves to be coming, right? In the sense of trades that we could potentially hold for a week, 2 weeks, to like go ahead and even see new highs get created. The one thing that we were wrong about with indices was US 30, right? So we said because we saw NASDAQ do what it did and that we were probably going to see a pushback down, we said that most likely we would actually see, US 30, go ahead and, sweep some of this trend line. We didn't end up getting that, right? Price ended up staying, with the order flow. And this is actually the thing that, I also said on the call too. I also did mention this though, is that even though we do have kind of trend line liquidity here in a way, right? We do it not necessarily trend line liquidity, but we do have trend line, right? We did have like a previous zone over here where price had manipulation and stuff. So we were like, all right, can we see that happen? But the thing is about this is that, like we said on that call, although this is a trend line, right? When we actually look into the lows of the trend line, we actually see signs of manipulation in all of the lows, right? So meaning like here, seeing price sweep out there, right? Here, right? Seeing price sweep out there, I believe, right? Here, again, institutional candle there at the bottom, right? Before we went up, doesn't look like we swept out, right? And then here as well, right? Sweeping out these previous lows. So it's like when we see like, especially specifically with trendline liquidity, this is always something that I'm personally very, very careful about. is like kind of assuming that we're going to target all the way down to there, right? I can imagine all the people who sold here that were thinking, oh yeah, we're going to go, all the way down towards this levels, right? And then price didn't end up doing that. Price literally just ended up trading back into the previous area of order flow before ending up, crashing through all-time highs, right? Or pushing through all-time highs, right? So, like I think a lot of people, probably could have made that mistake, right? Of thinking, all right, this is probably going to be liquidity that we're going to be, clearing up and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, personally, guys, like I'm still bullish on indices. For right now, right? As long as we're still holding this order flow, that's how I'm gonna continue to look at this, right? And again, like seeing things like Nasdaq do its thing there, right? Seeing things like S&P 500, right, do its thing right here, right? Like we're still holding points of order flow, right? I think that sell off to the downside that happened all week was just a huge sweep, and now this week we're gonna get our opportunities for buys, right? So let's talk about what we can see going forward. All right. So for me, what I'm kind of seeing higher time frame wise is going to be this move right here on Nasdaq. All right. I think there's a pretty strong possibility that we don't take this low, just given the fact that we swept all of this internal liquidity and we really respected this zone very well. I don't really think there's like incentive to, come to too much lower, like into this extreme area. But obviously that remains to be seen if we do end up, doing that. We'll probably still respect this low, but I think that with what's happening here, we're seeing order flow, right? Where we had this sweep, now we have our next sweep. This is going to be our order flow point, right? So my idea is going to be to go ahead and buy Nasdaq below 24,670. All right. So looking for, again, buys on this, right? Probably again, like maybe even lower, right? Like probably taking this low, getting back into this imbalance that we're sitting there. And then we're going to go ahead and see like, all right, can we get our smaller time frame confirmations to go ahead and actually, look for the long from this area, right? But I think higher time frame wise, this is going to be a good zone for Nasdaq to go ahead and trade into and then recover over the next week, maybe 2 weeks, right? To potentially even break higher time frame highs from there, right? US 30 wise, if that same thing does happen, I really don't think that we'll see US 30 get back down into here, right? That's a little bit too far. I think that most likely we'll see gaps be filled more likely. So most likely we'll get, push to the downside, right? And then inside of this gap, right, we'll see if we can get a reaction. And then that's going to be my first zone. And if not, then we'll definitely use this as our second zone. But I think that if US 30 does go down into there, it'd be pretty hard to see NASDAQ not doing, the same thing and like, maybe even breaking that low. And then maybe still respecting this one. But I think NASDAQ holds that low. So because of that, again, we'll just see how it aligns in terms of like where these things go. Obviously, these things can be in very different places. But I think if NASDAQ goes for the mitigation, I think US 30 probably will just go for the imbalance fill. And then from there, we see if we can see signs of manipulation to go ahead and buy back up, right? So I think in here, this is the zone we want to be looking for. So, below 29,600, or sorry, 49,600, that's where we're going to want to look for, potential continuations on US 30, right? And we did break all-time highs. So cool to see. And if we look at where that imbalance also aligns on the daily time frame here, we see it also aligns with the open of this daily down candle, right? This could be our institutional candle there on the daily. So yeah, I do like this 4 hour zone, right? For potential buys on US 30. Okay, guys. So yeah, we got US 30, we got NAS, and we got what we're seeing for dollar, right, as well, right? We got our two zones marked up. Currency wise, again, like we're just gonna want to follow what dollar does. If we do end up seeing like dollar go ahead and come up for a potential sell idea, right, where we get something up here, the one that I'm gonna be most interested in is gonna be Euro USD, right? The main zones I'll do there, this trap candle there on Euro USD and as well down here in the extreme area. That's what I'm going to want to see price actually come into. So most likely the trap candle by how things are looking now, I think that there is some chance that this could be accumulating and then, maybe we get another sweep. But that remains yet to be seen, if we're going to really confirm it, right? But all I know is that right now we're kind of trading in a range. So maybe we do end up getting a sweep down to then recover. And then, at least I would probably expect, like, again, imbalances to get filled, get back up into there, minimum, right? So that's why I'm kind of thinking buys can potentially make sense for this, right? But yeah, and then if for the other side, if we do end up seeing, dollar actually come down for buys, I would probably look at something like GU maybe, right? So looking at GU, what we can see is obviously we did end up taking a buy trade short term on this last week. Really, really nice entry. Really good target that we took as well, right? Good 1 to 3. And but basically what ended up happening was after we took our trade, price ended up redistributing, right? We see the market go ahead and get to the top of the accumulation and go ahead and create institutional candle there, right? If we look on the 1 hour, we could see a really nice institutional candle there, and then we create this imbalance down here. So if we were to see dollar go ahead and like trade down, first, then that would be GBP USD doing the same thing. And I'd probably go ahead and look at this zone over here for potential just order flow continuations on GBP USD, right? So if I were to look for the buys, right? Personally, I'm going to go with EU. And if I were to look for the buys on dollar, I'm going to go for GU. If I were to look for the sells on dollar, I would go for EU, right? From what I'm seeing so far, in the market. And again, indices are what personally I'm most excited about those. So personally, I think, we'll go ahead and see if we can execute on this and then gold as well. We'll see what kind of opportunity that gives us and what silver does. This will be interesting to see, right? We have our zones marked up higher time frame wise, and now it's just about once we get into those zones, we look for our proper entry model, we look for our proper confirmations, and then we go from there. All right, guys. So that's it from me. Okay. I think that we can go ahead and wrap this up now. All right. I appreciate you guys being on the call. Once again, it's obviously going to be uploaded on YouTube. So if you guys want to just mark up the zones yourself or whatever, watch the recording, go ahead and tap into that. For those of you guys that are watching on YouTube, much love. Appreciate you. Like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you guys on the next one. All right. Much appreciation. All right. Peace out. Deuces.